Well, good morning, everybody. This is Barry Jones with Standards Plus History Academy, and I'm adjusting my camera there. This is Monday morning, April 8th, and we are beginning episode 71 today. We've been looking at the deep state, and otherwise known as the power elites, and we've worked our way through the origins of the deep state, which happened in the post-Civil War era, and then began integrating itself from the private sector into the public sector as a result of World War I and especially World War II, and brought with them their Ultra Vires doctrine, which was that their main concern was to maximize profits. Their main concern was never to be public interest or what was morally right. It was all about profits. And of course, written into the Ultra Vires doctrine was the stipulation that everybody involved should be immunized from liability. The persons involved are automatically immunized, and then the corporations were immunized through a variety of methods. As far as its assets were concerned, these assets were immunized from liability by being spread out amongst subsidiary companies, a labyrinth of subsidiaries where you could hide your assets in case somebody tried to sue you for damages. It'd be almost impossible to pierce that corporate veil and get at those assets, especially the assets of the mother corporation. And then from tax liability by creating holding companies or shell companies and creating the appearance that all of these companies were separate entities, whether subsidiaries hiding assets or shell companies or holding companies hiding profits. These were all to appear as if they were separate companies, separate corporations. And of course, they weren't. The same board of directors ran all of them. And that's how these corporations got very, very large. And the families began to combine or consolidate as intermarriages took place from elite family to elite family. And this is how, over time, 50 to 60 people ran all of the corporations in the United States, which means they're running the entire U.S. economy. And by integrating themselves into the political arena, the public sector, and by supporting politicians with huge donations, they were running the U.S. government as well. FDR warned of it before his first term of office that we were becoming an oligarchy where these few, whether you want to call them robber barons or captains of industry, were running everything. And that's a very dangerous place to be. They're not elected. There's no accountability. They're in the shadows, but they hold all the power, hence the term deep state. We also learned that these, once they integrated themselves into government and brought all of this ultra vires mindset with them, now what used to be a situation where you had the private sector practicing the most extreme form of capitalism, which can be cruel and Darwinian. You always assumed that the government was looking out for the public interest. But when ultra vires seeped into the government, now you have nobody looking out for the public interest. Everyone's looking out to maximize profits and to immunize themselves or whatever entity they belong to from any kinds of liability. So this is how all of this happened and set in motion what's going to happen next. The question today for episode 71 is, how did Eisenhower cater to this power elite? And then sort of hypocritically warn against it later. That's the topic we're going to look at today. Top picture there, excuse me. top picture there is Eisenhower giving his famous farewell address, which appears on its face to be a president warning future generations of something that he's recognized and has been fighting against, and that could alter the direction of our country. That's how it looks, and that's kind of how I think he designed it to look, but it's not necessarily so. The bottom picture is just a reprint of the original document from which he read for the purposes of that speech. And you can see that he's made some notations or underlined some key phrases there, which made it into the press coverage. Second question we want to look at today is, what power elite figures specifically had Eisenhower's ear? And these are the Dulles brothers. John Foster Dulles, under Eisenhower, becomes Secretary of State. Allen Dulles, John Foster's brother, becomes director of the CIA. When we last looked at these two, they were running Sullivan and Cromwell, the law firm that was protecting all these U.S. companies that were facilitating Hitler's rise to power. They were protecting them from any liability. Remember, Ultra Vires. They were also busy protecting their assets during the course of the war to make sure that their companies, their clients' assets were not being destroyed by bombing raids and things of that nature that were taking place as a result of the war. In other words, they were directing war strategy. And then after the war, they were protecting any ties that might lead back, be exposed of their companies or clients, and how they had financed Nazi Party and the German war machine, and also protecting German assets that they thought might be valuable to the United States going forward in a new Cold War with the Soviets. So they were sneaking out, specifically Allen Dulles was sneaking out through rat lines, which is like an underground railroad. Nazis, these are war criminals that they thought, Allen Dulles thought might be useful in the future, especially in the realm of intelligence, to him. That nobody knew the Soviets, nobody knew the communists, nobody knew the Russians better than the Germans. And we were always looking for assets to recruit. And he saw these as his most valuable recruits at the outset of the Cold War. And of course, none of this, the American people didn't know any of this. None of this is in the public interest of anybody. You know, we made a big production out of the Nuremberg war crimes trials, saying we are bringing the Germans to justice. And yet we find out later a lot of the most heinous crimes, heinous criminals escaped that justice because Allen Dulles helped them escape and come to America or work for America in the new CIA as spies and intelligence assets. So, you know, they were negotiating. They were together, both of them were negotiating against FDR and Churchill's agreement at Casablanca, which was to not negotiate secret peace agreements with the Germans until the Russians had defeated the Germans in the East. This is what Stalin was afraid was going to happen. That's exactly what happened. Both of these guys were countermanding the policy, the directives of their commander-in-chief. They were doing their own thing. They were doing their own thing. So now they've been promoted. Allen Dulles is no longer in Europe running the OSS. He's going to come home and run the new CIA. By the time Eisenhower's president, he is the director of the CIA. John Foster is going to come home and leave private practice, Sullivan Cromwell, and now become the Secretary of State. Of course, even after they leave the private sector and enter the public sector, evidence shows that they continue to work on behalf of their private sector clients. And that is where they conflated their roles as public sector public servants with private sector jobs, protecting their clients and impacting public sector public policy. in the interest or serving the interest of their clients. So these guys are conflicted, to say the least, and these are the two guys that Eisenhower listens to during his 8 years as president. Another question I want to look at is this, quote, new look foreign policy that Eisenhower crafts. Of course, he does not craft this policy independent of the counsel he's getting from his advisors. And these advisors, as we've just seen, are specifically John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles, and they are going to help him craft a new foreign policy specific to the new threat, which is the Soviet threat, communist threat. And it's going to involve several different components, but primarily these three, which I've pictured. The top one is nuclear deterrence, which Eisenhower is going to greatly expand the nuclear program. We have the nuclear advantage during this period, and it is seen as the ultimate hammer. Secondly, this is a CIA, Alan Dulles idea that we should have the right to overthrow foreign governments. The CIA should be involved in coups d'etats, and executive actions whereby we actually take out foreign leaders whom we don't feel are sufficiently anti-communist. And of course, we get to determine, even if countries claim they're neutral, if they are not sufficiently anti-communist, then we have the right to go in and overthrow those governments and replace them with our people. What we're going to discover is this is code, or this is a pretext. This anti-communist lingo, scare tactic, is going to become a pretext whereby the CIA is actually doing the bidding, using military, United States military, to do the bidding of their American big business overlords. So when we need oil, we'll go take it from Iran and overthrow Iran's government. When United Fruit needs land, we'll go overthrow Guatemala's government and give United Fruit all the land that they want. When we want sugarcane and all the other business interests involved in Cuba, we'll launch a series of operations to overthrow Castro, and on and on and on it goes. So what we're going to discover right quick is that the anti-communist, just the phrase we're trying, anti-communism becomes a very handy tool in the toolbox of the deep state, of the power elites, to get people out of the way, or get governments out of the way that are not cooperating with their desire and their goal to maximize their own profits. The last one pictured here is the U-2 spy plane. Eisenhower is going to propose to Khrushchev an open skies policy whereby they can fly over us and we can fly over them, and gather intelligence about what each other's doing as far as military buildup is concerned. Of course, he knew Khrushchev would never agree to that. And so we launched our own spy plane program. This is a CIA project, and this U-2 plane is going to be a very handy instrument for us through the decade of the 50s and into the early 60s as well. It was basically an untouchable plane, flew so high and fast, and was virtually undetectable to radar, flew above radar, and had this high resolution photographic equipment on board, and gave us a technical advantage when it came to gathering intelligence over the Soviets. They did not have the equivalent of a U-2 plane, spy plane program. Now, they had an advantage with human intelligence because the United States is an open country. It's very easy to gain access to the United States compared to gaining access to the Soviet Union, which is why we came up with a fake defector program during Eisenhower's administration. We had to resort to fake defectors to try to sneak our spies in. There were a lot of spies, Soviet-wise, in America circulating, got in pretty easily. So we had to have a technical advantage to make up for our human disadvantage. Anyway, those are three of the elements of the Eisenhower foreign policy, which is referred to as the New Look foreign policy. All right, so here is John Foster Dulles at the side of Eisenhower. And pretty much everything that Eisenhower did during the time Foster Dulles was Secretary of State has Foster Dulles's fingerprints all over it. And primarily, this switch from conventional weapons to nuclear weapons. Foster Dulles was convinced that the nuclear weapons, rather than being a weapon of last resort, should be a weapon of first resort, and convinced Eisenhower of such because, according to Foster Dulles, the next war was going to be nuclear anyway. And in an era when we were trying to balance the budget, military spending for conventional weapons was extremely expensive. And one of the convenient rationale that Foster Dulles offered Eisenhower was, look, if we build up our nuclear stockpile at the expense of our conventional weapons, we can actually save money. We'll become more powerful, but we can save money in the process because nuclear weapons and nuclear weapon delivery systems are actually cheaper than building, as it turns out, submarines, ships, aircraft carriers, and tanks, et cetera, et cetera. And so this becomes the doctrine of massive retaliation, which is kind of interesting when you think about it. It really handicaps you in an event of a small regional conflict as far as a proportional response. It really is, because Foster Dulles believes the next war is going to be nuclear anyway. We might as well prepare for doomsday. In fact, they even called it the doomsday plan. And just build these weapons that are going to destroy the world, basically. And the rationale is that since we have the nuclear advantage, it's really not a doomsday plan right now. It is for our enemy, but not for us. Now, there's going to come a time when the Russians are going to catch up, but we need to take advantage of this moment in history that we find ourselves in now because we have the nuclear advantage. We won't always have it, but we do have it now in the 50s. And that gives us political leverage. When negotiating with anybody, they know we have the bomb. They don't. It gives us strategic advantage in any negotiation or any diplomatic impasse, whatever, because everybody knows we have the ultimate hammer. And so, since nuclear weapons also happen to be cheaper than conventional weapons, since the next war is going to be nuclear anyway, we might as well build nuclear weapons and keep the world safe by utilizing this bluff. Evan Thomas wrote a book called Ike's Bluff. And basically, what Eisenhower was gambling or calculating or counting on, and so was John Foster Dulles, in fact, this is where he got it, was that the world would be kept at peace by the United States saber rattling with our ever increasing nuclear capabilities. No one will want to mess with us. And so that will be the ultimate leverage instrument to be used in any head-to-head confrontation, whether it be diplomatic or military. And, it's kind of the forerunner of what Ronald Reagan called peace through strength. And as the Russians began adopting their own form of massive retaliation, building up, doing research and development, as it turns out, stealing our nuclear secrets and catching up to us, it becomes more a policy of brinksmanship, because as time goes along and we both have weapons of mass destruction, we both have nuclear weapons, nuclear capabilities, it becomes quickly apparent during the arms race that we both have enough weapons to destroy each other many times over, and in fact, the world many times over. And then once you're no longer the sole proprietor of nuclear weapons, there's somebody else out there, your ideological enemy has them, an equal capacity or close to equal capacity, you now find yourself constantly on the brink. They call this brinksmanship. Foster Dulles said, quote, "The ability to get to the verge without getting into the war is the necessary art. If you're scared to go to the brink, you're lost." This is the era in which my parents came of age. And about a decade later, I was born. And I remember growing up in this the tail end of this era where you're uh, having drills in school and everyone's jumping under their desks with their heads between their knees and their hands over their heads. And in the event of a nuclear attack, I always wondered as I looked around and I'm sitting under this wooden desk, kneeling under this wooden desk, and my desk happened to be next to a window. And I just remember thinking, these nuclear weapons must not be as powerful as everybody says they are if this is going to save me. Of course, that was ridiculous, but that was the climate. People were building bomb shelters under their houses or in their yards, stockpiling food, canned goods. Everybody was preparing for the end of the world because both governments are building towards that end in this galactic game of chicken that was started by guys like John Foster Dulles and who prevailed upon the President Eisenhower, and that is this doctrine of massive retaliation that Eisenhower believed in and worked towards that end. This new look foreign policy was, according to author Vincent Blevins, who has researched this exhaustively in his book, Jakarta Method, said the new rule was that neutral governments were potential enemies, and that Washington could decide if and when an independent third world nation was insufficiently anti-communist. This is really going to come into play with Allen Dulles. That John Foster is involved heavily with the nuclear deterrence and the Eisenhower Doctrine, which we'll talk about here in a second. As far as the covert capabilities of the CIA, that was Allen Dulles' responsibility, and he's the one that advocated this new look. So here you see what's going on. You got the Dulles brothers whispering in Eisenhower's ear. John Foster's saying we need a policy of massive retaliation, nuclear weapons, brinksmanship. And then you have Allen Dulles whispering in the other ear, we need this new look foreign policy where we can go in and restructure these third world nations and their governments. Both sides are trying to recruit these third world nations to their side, and neutrality is no longer acceptable. They have to either choose us or the enemy. If they are neutral, we're going to assume that they are with the Soviets or at least insufficiently anti-communist, and so we have the right to go in there and impose an American solution, which of course meant a coup d'etat, an overthrow, executive action, or possibly an assassination of that leader. And so during the 50s, you're going to see this happen time and time again in Iran, in Guatemala, Cuba, etc. And so we're just running wild. We're during Eisenhower's administration, that's the point I'm trying to get to. During Eisenhower's administration, we are running wild. The United States is building and researching and developing nuclear weapons. We're testing them all underwater, underground, above ground, making it known to everybody our capabilities from a nuclear standpoint. Of course, the Russians are hanging on for dear life, trying to catch up. And it's full speed ahead, baby. And then the CIA's all over the world, especially the Middle East and the third world countries in Latin America, overthrowing governments, launching coup d'etats, practicing a policy we find out later in the church hearings of executive action, whereby we're working towards assassinating foreign heads of state. We've got our U-2 planes flying over Russia, flying over Cuba, flying over anybody, really, gathering intelligence. And then the third prong of this Eisenhower foreign policy, which we refer to as the Eisenhower Doctrine, is the potential to use economic and military aid to any country, specifically in the Middle East, that we deem necessary to help or to support in their struggle to fight against communists. And we see this in the Suez crisis in Egypt. We see it in Lebanon. The United States is acting as sugar daddy. It's kind of the carrot and the stick. You know, the carrot is economic aid. We'll give you money. We'll give you money to support capitalism in the West and not flip over to the Soviet side. Or we'll give you military aid to resist the rebels, the communist rebels that are trying to overthrow your government. That's the carrot. The stick is, if you are not sufficiently anti-communist, we will come in and overthrow your government and take your resources and kill your king or your democratically elected leader. There's the carrot and the stick. It's kind of like, it's no different. It's like it's a gangster mentality. If you watch the Godfather and understand what it means to make somebody an offer that they can't refuse. In the Godfather, Vito Corleone makes an offer to the head of the movie studio, who doesn't want to give Frank Sinatra his movie deal. And he says, basically, you're going to sign, something's going to be on this contract before I leave. It's either going to be your signature or it's going to be your brains. One of the two. That's called making somebody an offer that you can't refuse. And that's what we're doing during the era of the Eisenhower administration, with the support of the CIA led by Allen Dulles and the State Department led by John Foster Dulles, both of whom earned their chops as far as the power elites are concerned, the deep state is concerned, by their service to the American big business through Sullivan and Cromwell, are now in a position to impact public policy and their president through this new look foreign policy, this Eisenhower Doctrine, this brinksmanship nuclear deterrent policy. And we're basically making all of these countries offers that they can't refuse. And as I mentioned earlier, this anti-communism became a pretense. And of course, during this time that Eisenhower was president, you recall from earlier episodes, the vice president was Richard Nixon. And he's running this 5412 committee, which is that super secret classified subcommittee of the CIA that's doing all the covert ops. It's the one doing these covert ops in Iran and Guatemala and Cuba. And Nixon's overseeing this. And you recall that according to the documents, when the National Security Act was passed in 47, as long as it could be argued that it was in the interest of the United States and it was serving to fight communists or the spread of communism, this 5412 committee led by Nixon could do anything it wanted as far as covert actions, anywhere it wanted in the world, anything it wanted, to anybody it wanted to, as long as you could justify it as it was fighting back against the spread of communism. So all this is being woven together. Nixon's involved in this. Foster Dulles is involved in this. Allen Dulles is involved in this. And Eisenhower's given them their big stamp of approval. So we have essentially, if you are in another country looking at the United States, let's say you're in Latin America, you have this big brother in your hemisphere that's pushing his weight around. If you're in Europe, or maybe you're in the Far East, or maybe you're in the Soviet Union, you're looking at the United States and realizing, boy, they're like this giant octopus squeezing the life out of everybody. And, these are heady times for the United States. And of course, what a lot of these covert actions turn out to be is just cover for these deep state, these power elite, big business owners, these corporate giants, these captains of industry or robber barons, whatever you want. There's just cover for them to get the resources from these places that they want. And they have their people positioned. You know, it's the same people that ran cover for them in World War II. It's the Dulles brothers. And now they're in the highest echelons of the United States government. So they can run cover and they can order military support and they can order covert actions in any one of these countries that these, you know, all you gotta do is push a button and say, hey, we need some help over here in Iran. Hey, we need some help over here in Guatemala. Hey, we need some help over here in Cuba. And voila, that help appears. It's all in the service of American big business. So I say all that to talk about what's next, and that's Eisenhower's famous warning in his farewell speech. January 17th, 1961, Eisenhower's term is over. Terms are over. It's 2 terms. And he is exiting stage left. And before he exits, he gives this televised address. It's kind of a tradition for presidents to give a farewell speech. In his farewell speech, he warns famously against something he called the military-industrial complex. He says, quote, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. This is a new concept, and boy, it caught the attention. I wanted to expand it out a little bit and give you some more context. That's the most famous little phrase that comes out of that speech, but he puts it in historical perspective. So let's look at these words. I think it's worth noting. This is Eisenhower speaking. Of course, now he didn't write this speech, all right, and I think that's important because we're going to see he made some changes to it. But anyway, this is what Eisenhower says. Quote: "Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well." What he's saying is, during peacetime, the American industry made products for peace. During wartime, they would retrofit their factories to make what we needed for war. And as soon as the war was over, they go back to making what they made during peacetime. But now we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. This is a direct result of World War I and World War II. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment, which means we don't demobilize after the wars anymore like we used to. People don't go back to the farms. They stay in the military. We put them on bases all around the world. Continuing on, added to this, we annually spend on military security more than the net income of all United States corporations. So military spending is accelerated at an unbelievable rate. This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, and even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development. In other words, he's saying, we need this. I'm not arguing that we don't need it. We do need it. Times have changed. Yet, we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by this military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. And, you know, this is a very prescient statement. This is very appropriate. This is relevant because this is exactly what's happened. He has accurately described what's going on. And there is a danger that we are going to become a militaristic society, and all these decisions are going to be governed by, this massive buildup of military hardware that is just ongoing. We've created a beast, and now we have to feed it. And of course, at some point, the implication is if you're creating this beast and you're feeding this beast, at some point you got to unleash the beast and let him go do his thing, which means war. That makes sense to build up all this stuff and not use it. At some point, you're going to have enough, or you're going to have too much. But if you have a war and you're constantly using it, you're constantly creating a demand for more. And that's what he's talking about, this permanent armaments industry, this permanent war industry. Interestingly, this warning comes off, knowing what we know already about Eisenhower, as slightly disingenuous, especially when you realize that he made some key changes to this document. The first thing you notice when you read this is this speech is a warning about the future. It says nothing about the past or even the present. He does not explain how he dealt with this problem. He doesn't really want to explain, because we all know he didn't do anything about this problem. He fed the beast. During a time that he was president, he green-lighted, in fact, the CIA covert op that went into Guatemala to overthrow Arbenz on behalf of United Fruit actually started to go south a little bit. The CIA asked for military support. Eisenhower, having already greenlit the covert action, then went a step further and greenlit United States military support. This is, by the way, why the CIA fully expected his successor, Kennedy, to do the same at Bay of Pigs, because Eisenhower had established a precedent. That happened in 1954. He had also personally benefited from the activities of Joseph McCarthy in the 1950s, because that fueled a Cold War fear, this Red Scare that the American people had of anything red, and resulted in this massive military buildup to fight back against this red invasion that was coming. It stirred the pot and got everybody fearful. And Eisenhower played to those fears to massively build up our nuclear stockpiles and nuclear weapons, etc. That's what created the very military-industrial complex he's talking about. In other words, Eisenhower's fingerprints are all over this military. He has unleashed a tiger. There's this cartoon I saw about an alligator, and so I can't remember. The context was the alligator was Adolf Hitler, and appeasement was like Churchill's equated appeasement to trying to tame the alligator, hoping that the alligator will eat you last. And you have all these appeasers running around, patting the alligator on the head, hoping that the alligator won't eat him. That's been Eisenhower for the last 8 years. He has allowed this military-industrial complex, which he is now warning the American people about, to grow and grow and grow. And now the alligator, as he exits stage left, appears to be untamable. And he's saying, hey, watch that thing over there. He might eat you. The alligator would not be the alligator, would not be the danger that it is if Eisenhower had heeded his own advice when he was president. But no, he greenlit every covert action that the 5412 committee wanted, every covert action or capability that Allen Dulles, the CIA, asked for, he greenlit. Everything that John Foster Dulles wanted as far as nuclear weapons are concerned, he greenlit. And so we've got this arms race, we've got this permanent armaments industry that is feeding this arms race now, and we've got these covert ops going on all over the world. There's even one in the pipeline that hasn't happened yet, the Bay of Pigs, which he basically greenlit the final days of his presidency that JFK is going to inherit. I mean, he has unleashed uh, a tornado. Poor Kennedy, he's walking into this Oval Office not realizing what he's inheriting. But Eisenhower is dropping a hot coal in his lap, basically, as he leaves. These pictures, this is a picture of Arbenz, the guy we overthrew in Guatemala, and you see him pictured below as he is arrested during the coup, and he is being humiliated in a strip search. And of course, the CIA is there to take photos of it. This is just one of the covert ops that happened while Eisenhower was president. So this is why I say this warning is disingenuous. It's late and it's disingenuous. Secondly, it's really important to notice who he leaves out in this military industrial complex that he has identified as the problem. He does not make any mention of the politicians and their role in any of this, specifically his or Congress's. In the original document, Malcolm Moose and Ralph Williams wrote this speech. And the original document, they identified it as the military-industrial congressional complex, which is why I call it the MICC, because that's really what it is. If you use the word congressional, this is what Eisenhower thought when he read the speech. He says, if I use this word congressional, it's going to highlight Congress's and the politicos' role in this dangerous phenomena that we have going on. And of course, he didn't want to highlight the politician's role, Congress's role, his role. So he just removed it. He removed the word. Now, we all know that without Congress, if you take Congress, you know, that diagram there on the right, if you take Congress out of this equation, the other two can't function. The Department of Defense submits a budget every year, and the president and Congress work out that budget and come to some sort of agreement on that. And that's how the Department of Defense gets the money that they need to spend. And then they take that money that they've been allotted by Congress and the president, and they hand out these contracts to these big corporations who build all the equipment that they need. And then they turn around, these military corporations, and use a lot of those contracts that they get to support Congress. They pick their congressmen and they support their campaigns with these huge campaign contributions. And when they get to Congress after they win, they now know that they owe their seat to these large military corporations, so that it's in their best interest. If they want to continue to get that support, they will continue to vote yes on all these appropriations bills and these budgets, these budgeting requests that the DOD sends them, and it just continues. It's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. They're feeding each other. But you take Congress out of that, who's giving the DOD the money to spend on these weapon systems that the large military corporations are building? They're in there. So it was very disingenuous of Eisenhower and self-protective. It was hypocritical. He's pointing the finger at the two legs of the three-legged stool. He said, you know, these two legs over here are causing all the problem, when really Congress is every bit as much the problem. And of course, the president signs these budgets, and so he's part of the problem. But if he uses that word, it draws attention to him and his role, to Congress and its role, and he doesn't want that to happen. He's your typical politician who wants to skate and walk on this and point the finger and scapegoat somebody else. And so he's scapegoating Department of Defense and large military corporations. That's why he calls it the military industrial complex. And he leaves out congressional. All the politicians walk. Here's their get out of jail free card. This is the immunity. This is the Ultra Vires mindset that has seeped its way into government. saying, we're all about profits and we're all about immunity. And I've covered myself and I've covered my political friends in this speech. The speech will be read and reread for generations to come. And people will write books about this military industrial complex, and it'll be forever ensconced in American society, that the boogeymen here is the military and these big companies. And the politicians walk away unscathed, as usual. So this warning is, though it is appropriate and in the fact that it's true, it is entirely disingenuous because Eisenhower has been president for the last 8 years. It's kind of like when, it seems like ever since I've been voting for president, every new president comes in and says the same thing. I know I made all these campaign promises, but it turns out the economy is worse than I thought. And my predecessor left me in a really bad spot. So I'm not going to be able to give you the tax cut we talked about, or I'm not going to be able to do this or do that. And they'll go as long as they can, blaming their predecessor for all the problems. That's what Eisenhower's doing. He's saying this all happened. I don't know how it happened. I don't know. I just woke up one day and boom, this is what's going on. He's been president for the last 8 years. What's he been doing? Turns out he's been signing a lot of budgets, and he's been greenlighting a lot of covert actions, and he's been creating this Eisenhower Doctrine and this new look foreign policy, which has created this very thing he's warning us about. And now he's laying this matzo ball in the lap of JFK. And basically, JFK is going to be left to deal with it. So the MICC is this military industrial congressional complex that the original drafters of this speech were talking about. The historical context of this is that as we get into the 60s, having come through the 50s, we are at the peak of anti-communist Cold War fanaticism. I mean, McCarthy has stirred that pot. We've been in this arms race. We got little children diving under their desks at school. We heard constantly about the Red Menace and about I'd rather be dead than red. We have movies out there. It's just, and so this hyper anxiety about the communist threat. In 1950, our military budget was $13 billion, but after this decade, in 1960, it's increased to $47 billion. It's more than tripled, almost quadrupled, and it's going to continue to go up. Why? Because, we're in peacetime. And normally in peacetime, we demobilize. Now, there's been a proxy war in there. We fought in Korea. But as far as that's over now. By the time we get to the end of Eisenhower's administration, that's been long over. Why is our military budget continuing to go up? Why are these corporations continuing to build all these armaments when we are presently at peace? We used to, as we've learned prior, we used to demobilize when the war was over. We're not anymore. Like Eisenhower said, we have a permanent armaments industry. It is an industry. And that is why, and of course, the Russians are trying to keep up with us. So there's an acceleration. It's as if we're still at war. And we call it the Cold War. And this continues these spigots. It keeps these spigots wide open after World War II ended so that the military spending never ends. We got hooked on it. World War I showed us the possibilities. World War II accelerated that. And now when the war is over, we realize we don't want it to end. The good times, we want the good times to continue. We need both these spigots turned to full on. And so anti-communism becomes the new boogeyman to keep this armaments industry going. And so that's why the increase over the course of the decade is going to continue to accelerate. The military-industrial congressional complex is defined as, quote, the relationship between a country's national security apparatus and the defense industry that supplies it. So that it involves those three entities. The country's national security apparatus is primarily the government, right? That's their job, is to protect us. National security, and with the president at the top of that is the commander in chief, and all the different agencies and departments, branches of the military, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, Congress pays all the bills, and so it's very much involved in that as well. That's the apparatus. And then the defense industry that supplies it. The Department of Defense does not make its own tanks. They don't make their own weapons systems. They contract with these private sector companies. And of course, what we're going to see over time is that these private sector corporations that make this military hardware, it's virtually all they do. If you took away all of their defense contracts, they'd cease to exist. They are living off the tit of the federal government. And of course, they're depending on the war or the threat of war to keep this snowball rolling downhill, gaining steam, gaining size, gaining momentum. And it's going to include, as far as the politicians are concerned, at the moment that he gives this speech, two of the most powerful people in America are the leaders of the Senate Armed Services Committee, which is Richard Russell, and LBJ, who's the Senate Majority Leader. These are the guys that finalize these big budgets. And Richard Russell, as the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, gets to determine what weapon systems, what budgeting requests by the Department of Defense get priority. And so it's going to be imperative for the military contractors to grease the pockets or grease the palm, or at least make life favorable for Richard Russell, because he is their best friend, as is LBJ, who's the Senate Majority Leader. He's the one that puts everybody in these positions. He appoints the chair of these committees. And so this is how a lot of people in 1960, when LBJ agrees to be JFK's vice presidential candidate, say, why on earth would you do that? It's a step down. You're going, even though you're now the number 2 guy, and if JFK dies, you become president, you're really being demoted, because right now, as the Senate Majority Leader, you're one of the most powerful men in the world. You control a lot of money, and hence a lot of political careers and a lot of military contractors, these big corporations. You control the fate of these corporations. You are in control of this entire military industrial congressional complex. You're more in control of it than the president. Why would you take a step down and go be somebody's vice president? And of course, that's when LBJ famously says, quote, power is where power goes. And he had done his research, and he knew that the odds were against JFK fulfilling his term or serving it to its completion, because he knew how many presidents had died in office, and he knew that it was coming due. And he said, I'll take my chances. I'll play the odds. So we'll get to LBJ later, but these are two of the most important politicians in Washington at the time Eisenhower is giving the speech. As far as the military is concerned, that it plays its role because it does two things. It makes the budgetary requests for the hardware that they're going to need, and it also provides military support for all these CIA covert ops in the event that the CIA is not able to carry out the covert op on its own. It's flying them in. It's providing military backup with if something goes wrong. It's that's what we learned from Fletcher Prouty. That was his job. He was the liaison between the CIA and the military. And when the CIA asked for help, for assistance in its covert ops, the military provided it. So, the military is very key in this. this new look foreign policy and this military industrial complex. It's requesting these weapon systems, and it's providing military support for the CIA and the intelligence agencies, CIA specifically. It's providing a couple things. One, it's providing overseas intel for the military. The FBI is providing domestic surveillance for the military, and it's sort of the eyes and the ears of the military. That's its job. So the CIA, the intelligence services, are very involved in this new look foreign policy and this military industrial congressional complex. A lot of times, it was intelligence who would be called in to testify before Congress as to the need for all these different actions, and they would rely on their intelligence reports. And of course, we all know that their intelligence reports were being influenced by guys like Alan Dulles at the top, who had all these big business contacts and connections, and he had clients to protect and their assets to protect. It's unbelievable. And then you have the corporations. Of course, they're the ones that build all this stuff. They get these big fat contracts, and then they make these campaign contributions. So they're like the money launderer. The Congress votes the money, the president signs it. It goes to the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense allocates it to these different contractors, and the contractors build the military hardware, take the money, and then turn around and feed it back in the form of campaign contributions to Congress, to future presidents, et cetera, et cetera. So you get some really big companies coming out: Lockheed Aircraft, Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, General Dynamics, Westinghouse, Hughes Aircraft, Brown and Root. There's a big one during Vietnam, Bell Helicopter. I mean, these are monster corporations that, if you take the war or the threat of war away, they have nothing left to build. Nothing quite like what they're building anyway. The private sector doesn't need tanks and aircraft carriers, weapon delivery systems, and things of that nature. And so they would have to go on a huge budget or tighten their belts a little bit if they had to rely on private sector business. But they don't. They've gotten fat and sassy with all these fat government contracts. So it's like a giant money laundering operation. And that is the tail that's wagging the dog now. And that's what Eisenhower is warning of. It wasn't just Eisenhower. Senator Fulbright warned of it in 61, June. He says, this is after Kennedy has become president, has inherited this monstrosity. And he issues a memo warning of a politicized military, predicting the possibility of a military coup, saying, our military has become so powerful. This industrial complex has become so powerful. This lobby, however you want to put it, has become so powerful that if ever a president comes along, a leader, a civilian leader who occupies the office of president, ever comes along who tries to tie this off, who tries to limit this runaway train, or stop this runaway train, or limit the power of this lobby, watch out. Watch out. He's touching on, the golden rule here. I grew up learning that the golden rule was do unto others, have them do unto you. But in politics, there's another golden rule, and that is he with the gold rules. And what he's saying is these folks think they're in charge, and they're not going to tolerate some president come along who's going to try to limit their power, who's going to try to cap their spending, who's going to try to turn off these money spigots, who's going to try to end war or remove the threat of war, because they see this as a threat to their livelihood. They see this as a threat to what they do, which is to maximize profits. And as long as you have a president like Eisenhower, everything's good, because he's greenlighting everything. He's our guy. If we ever get somebody in here who tries to stop this, Fulbright's saying there's the possibility of a military coup. And he references what had just happened in France, where the generals attempted to overthrow Charles de Gaulle because he was trying to do what Fulbright is warning could happen here. He's trying to, you know, the generals in France are wanting to maintain a colony, and they're wanting to use military force to put down a rebellion in one of the French colonies, and he's trying to disentangle France from that. In other words, to end this military support, this military action. And the generals disagreed with him, and so they put together this coup. And it turns out when he investigated it, he found out our CIA was involved. And the reason we know he knows is because he confronted Kennedy over it. He said, "Hey, why is your CIA trying to assassinate me? They were working in cahoots with these French generals who tried to assassinate me." And ironically, it was the exact same setup as Dallas. It was a motorcade. And they tried to assassinate Charles de Gaulle in a motorcade. And when he investigated, he found out the American CIA was involved working with the French generals to make this happen. And he confronts Kennedy over it. And Kennedy says, "I didn't order that. I had nothing to do with it." He says, "But I will investigate it and I'll get back to you." And when he gets back to de Gaulle, he tells de Gaulle, "You're right. Our CIA was involved in it. It turns out I'm not in control of my own government." And this is a warning sign that Fulbright has mentioned. He's saying, that this thing that just happened in France could happen here. Now, I don't know if Fulbright knew at this point that our CIA was involved in what had happened in France, but Kennedy found out, Kennedy knew, and de Gaulle certainly knew. And after the assassination of JFK, I'm going to circle back and show you what de Gaulle said and what he knew about the assassination of JFK. And it is unbelievable how right he was. In that moment, right after the assassination, he knew exactly what had happened because it almost happened to him. The exact same thing. So, here's a warning. This alligator that we've been feeding is now turning. And if anyone comes in and cuts off that food supply, that alligator is going to eat something. It's going to eat somebody. That military industrial congressional complex has gotten very large because of all the food we've been feeding it, all the money we've been spoon feeding it down its throat. And now it's at this enormous appetite. You got to continue to feed that beast. And if you ever cut it off, stop feeding that beast, that alligator is going to turn around and eat you. He didn't care what he eats. He just has to eat something. And there are a couple of media personalities who warned as well, saw the same warning signs. Columnist Marquise Childs wrote in 61, quote, "In one country after another in recent years, the intervention of the military in politics has had disastrous consequences." And he's warning about the military and this complex that Eisenhower is also warning about taking over our government. And of course, my whole point in all this is saying that it's this deep state, these power elites that are controlling all this. It's the power elites who run the corporation. It's the power elites who run these corporations who support the politicians, give them the money that they need for their political campaigns. So they're in essence in control of the government. And then the government's budgets this money to create these projects that they contract out to these companies. So it's all run by this complex, this web of 50 to 60 people that are running these corporations that have now, in some cases, integrated themselves into high ranking positions within the government to continue this war, threat of war, and all these covert ops so that it keeps everybody in a heightened state of alert, like we're constantly at war, so that this money train can continue to chug on down the tracks. Columnist Drew Pearson, who's one of the preeminent writers during this period, columnists during this period on anything political, said, quote, "Certain Pentagon brass hats are lining up with industrial right-wingers to foment a sort of neo-fascism." Fascism is when you combine, when the government, corporations, the private sector corporations get in bed together. And that's exactly what he's describing. That's exactly what has happened. The government has gotten in bed with these corporations, and they're scratching each other's backs. Anyway, he says they get together with these industrial right wingers to foment a sort of neo-fascism, despite the fact that they're wearing Uncle Sam's uniform. So they're doing it under the guise of patriotism, under the guise of national security, under the guise of protecting America from this menace, this red menace that is threatening the world with world conquest. And essentially what it is just a big money scam. That's all it is. It's a big money scam being run by these power elites. But in order to keep the tax dollars flowing, that's what it is. It's all tax dollars. It's all coming from John Q. Public. They got to keep John Q. Public afraid. They got to keep John Q. Public worried about nuclear stockpiles and nuclear weapons and what the Russians are, the newest weapon that the Russians have. And that's why I remember when I was a kid, my dad subscribed to U.S. News and World Report, and we didn't have a television. So I grew up as a voracious reader because that was the only entertainment we had in our house. We didn't have any TV or radio or anything. We just read magazines and books. So I used to read Time magazine and U.S. News and World Report and all these different publications. My dad probably had 25 magazine subscriptions. Half of them were sports related, so I was very interested in that. But the other half were current events and politics. And so I remember U.S. News in particular had at one of the first pages of every issue, and I think they were a weekly, I'm pretty sure it was a weekly edition. They had a page where they had a missile count. And I don't know where they were getting this information, probably the CIA, where they would have little red missiles on this graph to show how many missiles the Soviets had and little blue missiles to show how many missiles the Americans had. And I remember watching that as a kid every week. That was the first thing I'd look at. How many missiles do the Soviets have? How many do we have? How many delivery systems? They'd go through all these different nuclear weapon capabilities and who was ahead and what the race looked like, what the scorecard looked like at any particular time, at any given time. And I mean, I was 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, and I was worried about how many weapon systems the Soviets had compared to us. And this was part of the propaganda, you know. And it wasn't just us. We're going to find out in the days to come that even candidates for president were lied to about the missile capabilities, the nuclear capabilities of the Soviets. CIA, when they gave candidate Kennedy a briefing on their missile supply versus ours, lied to him, said there was a missile gap, said the Soviets had passed us and they had more missiles, knowing that Kennedy would run out on the campaign trail and tell all the American people that and get everybody all stirred up and afraid and crazy and say, we need to vote more money to catch up because we're behind. It was all propaganda. It was all we were spoon-fed this information to keep us afraid so that we would stay on a war footing, so that the spending would keep up or even increase. And as we saw, it always increased. So to keep this military industrial congressional complex, to keep this alligator fed. And of course, a lot of people are getting rich in the meantime. And as I said before, if there's ever a president who comes along who sees this for what it is and tries to put a stop to it, he's going to become a threat instantly to a lot of very important people who do not have the public interest in mind, don't have any qualms about the morality of what they decide to do about him. They don't care. It's all about profits. And they will make sure that whatever they decide to do about him, they are immunized from any culpability or any liability going forward. Does that not explain Dallas? I mean, I'm getting ahead of myself, but does that not explain Dallas in a nutshell? And of course, we have not talked yet about anything that Kennedy has done. We're just getting to the point where he's becoming president and he's inheriting this behemoth, this juggernaut, this this out of control train that's running wild. He's inheriting it. This tiger, he's got this tiger by the tail. He's gonna have to decide what to do about it. And better watch your back, Jack. Better watch your back. There's a lot of deep staters out there. There's a lot of power elites that are watching, and they're keeping score. Okay, that is episode 71. And I hope you enjoyed that. Check out my website, sphistory.com, if you're interested in any content above and beyond this. Also, feel free to subscribe to my channel. It's free. Hit the notification bell and give me a thumbs up. And certainly feel free to leave a comment. I don't hit everything. I don't know everything. I don't pretend to know everything. I don't pretend that I cover everything. I'm doing my best. I'm trying to keep things simple, at the same time still give adequate backstory so you kind of understand the full context of what we're looking at here. But feel free to comment, and that's how we all learn. So hope everybody has a good day. Looks like it's going to be a rainy day here in Tennessee. Temperatures are pretty good. So it's spring. We had a great, gorgeous weekend. So now it's time for the rain again. Anyway, until tomorrow, everybody have a great day. Thank you. God bless.